Before I start this video, there's a situation that I would like to make you all aware of. If you don't know, Kraut & T has returned from his 8-month exile. Apparently the whole thing about his server and the doxing that allegedly went on there, it's all bullshit. There was never any doxing, there was never any collection of doxes. It was a server that was supposed to do scientifically accurate response videos to people. Mostly people on the alt-right. Thus, the alt-right were the ones who orchestrated this whole thing, and a lot of right-leaning YouTubers or extremely nihilistic YouTubers just sort of ran with that narrative. I really encourage you to check all of that out for yourselves. There's also a bunch of videos that aren't on YouTube anymore. I do feel like he went after some people a bit more viciously than he should have. There are some claims in there that are just a bit exaggerated, but on the other hand, I can understand that he would react like this, considering the hell him and his family have been going through for the past 8 months. So really just go and form your own opinion. I think that word should get out about this. Also, quick disclaimer, this will be a video about history. I am not, however, a historian who holds a degree in history, right? This is researched. I know a lot about history, but I am not some sort of scientific publication in the House of Elsevier. Also, not every second one of my sentences is going to be, oh, this is bad what the Nazis did. I think we can all agree that it is bad what the Nazis did. That's just not something that we need to be reminded of. Any normal thinking person should know that this is the case. So let's get into talking about Hitler's gay friend. Ernst Julius Günther Röhm was born to a Protestant house in Bavaria, which was unusual because Bavaria has always been very Catholic in its religiosity on account of it being in southern Germany. His family was always very loyal to the royal house of Bavaria, which I am only telling you so I can show you this picture of the current head of the royal house of Bavaria, looking gangster as fuck. After finishing high school in 1908, Röhm fulfilled his childhood dream of becoming a soldier and moved to Ingolstadt to live in a garrison. He soon became known as a bon vivant who enjoyed the finer things in life and a very jovial and likable guy to be around. He fought in World War I in France, and in 1914 he was injured when he was shot in the face. It actually looks quite alright. You wouldn't be able to tell that his nose is actually made of plastic. He did have breathing complications throughout his life. He had to learn a special technique to fill his lungs with oxygen, and also pockets of pus always formed around this nose because his body obviously rejected it. After healing in 1915, he returned to the place where he had been shot at and quickly became a commander, embarking in what he later described as the nicest year of his military career, because apparently war is fun. In 1916, while fighting in Verdun, he was injured again, this time having a whopping 14 grenade splinters all over his body. During his healing process, he worked at several desks and eventually returned to the front lines and was placed in charge of logistics for the 16th Bavarian Infantry Division, which fought in Romania and later the Western Front. After the war, Röhm joined the Freikorps, which requires a lot of context to explain to you mainly what even a Freikorps is. You see, after the First World War, Germany was in a sort of political limbo, but one of the few things that were clear is that they were not allowed to have an army. However, everyone sort of wanted to make their own new German state because the old one had been abolished. And while the Social Democrats declared the Democratic Republic, the Socialists declared the Socialist Republic. The Social Democrats was the official power that had been given the authority to be the new government in the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II. However, how the fuck were they going to enforce this without any army? Well, there was no army, but there were a lot of soldiers, and many of those soldiers, just having come out of a war, decided to band together in sort of paramilitary, non-official organizations. These were known as the Freikorps, named after a practice of having sort of exotically armed, sometimes built from deserters of other armies, groups of people fighting in various wars. They were essentially mercenary militias, and the Social Democratic government hired and legitimized them into the Reichswehr so they would fight against the socialist groups for them. However, though the government that the Freikorps served was Social Democratic, the Freikorps themselves not so much. Most of them were ultra-nationalistic right-wingers, So they didn't really give a shit about honor or due process or the law when it came to dismantling the structures built by socialists. Ernst Röhm himself participated in the dismantling of the Bavarian Soviet Republic, which was fucking brutal. Eventually the Treaty of Versailles people realized that, hey, hang on a minute, you're not allowed an army. That sort of is an army. Come on, are you trying to fuck with me here? But I'm getting ahead of myself. There were also various other paramilitary organizations in Weimar Germany, most of them also ultranationalist, but I won't get into them here. However, not all Freikorps were horrible. There was one called Technische Nothilfe, which translates to Emergency Technological Assistance. They were mainly composed of engineers and weren't really more ultranationalistic than you would expect a soldier to be. They actually existed longer than almost all of the other Freikorps, because they existed until 1945. The modern THW, the Federal Agency for Technical Relief, formed in 1950, was modeled after the Technische Nothilfe Freikorps. It's a volunteer organization funded by the German government. You can imagine them being a bit like the firefighters, except that they don't really fight fire, but focus on all of the other technical aspects that a firefighter organization might do. Really, you could sort of call them the water fighters, because most of what they deal with is floods, which happen very frequently in Germany, which is a country dominated by rivers. They do infrastructure, logistics, and humanitarian relief mostly in Germany, but often also in other parts of the world, like for instance the United States. After Hurricane Katrina, THW engineers and equipment were used to almost completely dry New Orleans over the course of 2 months. And they also repaired the local pumping stations. But before we get too sidetracked here, let's go back to Ernst Röhm and Freikorps App. In the complex and convoluted collection of Freikorps that made up the Reichswehr, an officers' club was formed called the Iron Fist, which included officers from all sorts of nationalist Freikorps, including Adolf Hitler. Hitler at the time was working for Reichswehr intelligence, and Ernst Röhm, being a respected member of the Iron Fist, helped him get a lot of military contacts that would eventually found his base of power. When the Treaty of Versailles was actually enforced, a lot of ultra-right-wing soldiers suddenly found themselves out of work. The Reichswehr had to be shrunk down by a lot. Röhm was not one of these soldiers. He was instead given the extremely important and highly illegal job of hiding weapons and munitions from Allied inspectors, and he did this by using his contacts in the vast ultranational network he had. He also got the assistance of many of these disgruntled ex-soldiers. During this time, he was dubbed the Machine Gun King of Bavaria, which is kind of badass, I have to admit. Röhm also joined the German Workers' Party, which was a short-lived and not particularly successful party that came from the Völkische Bewegung, which was an anti-Semitic ultranationalist social movement, and Hitler was already in this party and in the middle of the process of taking it over from its original founder, Anton Drexler. That's right, caring about workers' rights was not an exclusively left-wing to-do during the Weimar Republic. Hitler eventually reformed the German Workers' Party into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which Röhm very quickly joined, and also convinced many of his nationalistic-leaning political friends in Bavaria and military leaders to join as well, giving this very new political entity a lot of legitimacy. Oh yes, the Nazi Party was a right-wing organization enacting right-wing policies in line with a right-wing ideology, controlled and inhabited mostly by right-wing people, and allied with right-wing ultranationalist ethno-statist paramilitary organizations. If you still believe that the Nazi Party was left-wing because it had the word socialist in its name, you are a fucking idiot who does not understand history. The term simply had a different meaning at the time, and not all right-wing ideologies are ultra-capitalist. Remember all the disgruntled soldiers from earlier? Well, they were still soldiering. They were now in ultranationalistic paramilitary organizations of their own, sort of thug groups, and Ernst Röhm was allied and also sort of a secret member of one of these organizations. In 1923, he used his influence and pulled a lot of strings to unite many of these organizations, including the SA and the Reichsflagge, which was the one that he was a part of. But remember, he was still part of the military, and when it came to light that he was actually doing these things and uniting these organizations and supporting them, a lot of the ranks in the military establishment closed against him because he was no longer trusted. That same year, Röhm used his access to all of the secret weapon stashes to arm these right-wing militias and was put on leave for that by the military until they were able to figure out what the fuck was going on. Making full use of his newfound free time, Röhm formed the Deutscher Kampfbund, which was supposed to be an umbrella organization for all these right-wing groups, and he placed Hitler in charge of it politically, while himself handling all the military aspects. Though Röhm considered Hitler to be an excellent figurehead for his organization, he did not like the idea of being subject to any sort of civilian government at all. He was a staunch militarist and would always remain that way. In November 1923, the beer hall putsch happened, and it failed. That's a whole video on its own. Needless to say, Röhm and Hitler both were put in prison. Röhm also had left the military by this point. Both the NSDAP and the SA were banned for a limited amount of time, which is why I always say, do not fucking ban Nazis doing Nazi shit, because they will be able to exploit that as a narrative. That is what has happened historically. Please learn from history and let them spew their bullshit with as much publicity as possible. Röhm was released from prison after only 5 months. In 1924, when the NSDAP was still banned, he was voted into parliament for the National Socialist Freedom Party, which had become the alternative to the still currently banned NSDAP, and it also included his new legal version of the SA, which was not called SA because the SA was also illegal. Instead he called it Frontbahn, and it was also a sort of umbrella organization for soldiers after the beer hall putsch had failed, so they could get proper military training and drilled onto a same unified doctrine, whereas when they came in, they were a lot of very disparate groups. He was very anti-capitalist and did not believe that any sort of government or military-industrial complex should be in any way capable of controlling this sort of military police proto-organization he was building. This put him at odds with the Nazi Party, who were not anti-capitalist and did want a sort of civilian government. When Hitler was released from prison and both the NSDAP and the SA were re-legalized, Röhm was tasked with rebuilding the SA from the ground up, using the Frontbahn organization as the sort of seeding ground for that. But he stopped doing it very quickly because there were major disagreements between him and Hitler. You see, Hitler wanted to keep the NSDAP a bit low-key, so people outside of those who would vote for them and who were susceptible to ultranationalist ideology wouldn't really know as much about them as they possibly should. And he also wanted the SA to be a sort of protector organization that was subject to the party and protected the party on its assemblies and also party members. Röhm did not give a shit. He wanted to take power by force again in the name of National Socialism, even though that had failed the first time around. He also really disliked the idea of his SA being subordinate to the party, because once again he was a staunch militarist. When Röhm left the SA and also Frontbahn, the latter organization dissolved very quickly, with a lot of its members becoming part of the former. Röhm himself at this point bounced back and forth between different not so well-paying jobs, and even published an autobiography. Eventually he re-entered the Nazi Party in an attempt to spread his anti-capitalist, pro-militarist ideas there, but soon gave up that quest when he saw that it was doomed to failure. All throughout this time, his disagreements with Nazi leadership, and especially Hitler, were exclusively ideological in nature. They were all always still friendly with each other. And in 1928, he moved to Bolivia. At the time, the Bolivian government was super obsessed with German military doctrine and discipline, and a lot of World War I German veterans were working in the Bolivian army. Röhm was given a job there, and it was very well paid too. He learned Spanish quite quickly and began lecturing at the military academy, later even reforming some garrisons into German structure and discipline. He still read a Nazi newspaper and corresponded with his Nazi friends by letters, and eventually they asked him to come back in 1930 and stand for election in the NSDAP, because they wanted well-known and established Nazi faces. Röhm decided that he didn't want to do that. However, in 1931, Hitler had a lot of problems controlling the SA, so Röhm was implored to come back to Germany and take control of the organization. Following his rapid rise to power in Bolivia, Röhm was under the impression that he could do the same thing in Germany, and eventually amass enough political power to transform the SA into the precise thing that he had wanted it to be from the beginning. Also, Hitler had done something that Röhm was very much in favor of. He was not only now the head of the NSDAP, but also the supreme commander of the SA, uniting military and party in one equal relationship, and not in one where the military is subordinate to the party. This is also where the term Mein Führer comes from, because the first people who called Hitler Führer were the people in the SA. Not Röhm though. He was such a close friend to Hitler, and that was well known, that he didn't even use the formal you when addressing him and called him by his first name. If you don't know this, German has an informal you, which is du, by which you mostly address people by their first name, and it also has a formal you, which is Sie, where you mostly address people by their last name and you call them Herr last name or Frau last name. Sie is also the proper pronoun for third person singular feminine and just third person plural, because the German language is averse to what many people would commonly refer to as making sense. Röhm became the de facto military leader of the SA, and over the course of 2 years managed to increase the organization from 77,000 men to 430,000 men. Despite having been politically on the outside for many years, even on a whole different continent, in a whole different hemisphere, he quickly regained his influence as one of the large figureheads in the Nazi movement. However, his ideological differences with the mainstream Nazis soon became an issue once again. Röhm wanted to abolish other military organizations and make the SA the only game in town. And he also wanted the SA to be an ideological force for National Socialism, but fundamentally divorced from party politics in every way, shape and form. He explicitly banned any members of the SA from having influence in the political party of the NSDAP, and he also didn't want the political party of the NSDAP to have any influence on the SA. At some point, he even described the organizations as completely separate. Meanwhile, most people in the NSDAP, including Hitler, saw the SA as just the military support organization for the Nazi party. The SA became a very powerful military force that fought in the very charged and violent political climate of Germany of the 1932 and 1933, being banned again for a short period of time, and eventually intimidating and even torturing political opponents of the Nazi party right in front of the March 1933 election. But I know why all of you are here. You clicked on this video because you wanted to know about Hitler's gay friend. And now you shall. 'Cause here's the thing, Ernst Röhm was gay. During 1920s Berlin, which was an incredibly vast and unhinged cultural place that I would have really enjoyed seeing, he lived out his homosexual tendencies in bathhouses and nightclubs, but he was always very careful so nobody could ever prove that he broke the law, because being homosexual was illegal at the time. At this point, non-Nazis were aware that the Nazis were dangerous. So the press decided to publish several articles creating several scandals about Röhm's homosexuality in 1931 and 1932. The Nazis really hadn't taken a stand at this point for or against homosexuality, because homophobia was just the default thing to have at that period of time. And so the accusations of homosexuality were not intended to discredit the NSDAP by hypocrisy, but just because being gay was considered to be bad at the time. And though it did create some internal strife within the Nazi party, the most thing that it did was create a hatred of homosexuals and a desire to rid oneself of the idea of homosexuality in the collective identity of National Socialists, which eventually made it a priority to exterminate homosexuals when they got around to doing their exterminating. The gay was placed in a similar camp to the Jew, because the Nazis believed that gays would go into government and corrupt it by the virtue of being gay, and evidence was used in that Röhm had installed several gay men as high-ranking SA officers. An assassination attempt was planned but never carried out, and though Hitler, who needed Röhm's support, was always protective of him, resentment against Röhm in the Nazi Party increasingly grew. Martin Bormann said in a letter to Rudolf Hess that he didn't really give a shit about Röhm being gay, but the fact that this was hurting the image of the Nazi Party made Röhm into an enemy of National Socialism. But none of the allegations really stopped the Nazis' rise to power, and when Hitler became Chancellor, he gave Röhm a lot of very important offices, making him essentially the number 2 man in the Nazi government. But a lot of problems still persisted. Röhm had not overnight become a fan of having his military organization be subject to a civilian government. And a lot of people within the Nazi Party didn't entirely agree with the current Nazi Party leadership, and that could be dangerous, so they would have to be removed. The SA didn't feel beholden to the NSDAP and its government in anything but the fact that they both shared the same ideology. They were raucous and violent, attacking political opponents with much more force than necessary, and they were all about the socialist aspect of National Socialism, wanting to seize private property. According to Röhm, National Socialism had gained power, but the revolution was not yet over. The Nazi Party didn't like this at all. They had a big problem with Röhm's wish for independence and wanted a traditional army that they could control. So the Nazi propaganda department slowly and steadily began disseminating the idea that the SA was dangerous to the cause of National Socialism, and voices became loud that claimed Röhm was planning a putsch to take power from Hitler. Tensions grew between the NSDAP, Wehrmacht SS and the SA. And after a very long conversation between Hitler and Röhm, Röhm didn't dissolve the organization, but he did give them a sort of general vacation to the 4 million people that at this point were part of the SA. Remember the thing with his nose? Well, he had to get treatment for that, and apparently he was of the opinion that he wouldn't be able to adequately carry out his duties as the leader of the SA during this time. In June of 1934, the noose was tightened around anyone who didn't toe the party line. Hitler had not yet achieved total power, and he needed to make sure that nothing and nobody could throw a wrench in his plans. Secret orders and memorandums were passed around that kept Röhm and his officers out of the loop, and the SD and SS received information that the SA was planning a putsch that would place Röhm in power for good. A list was compiled by the highest echelons of the Nazi Party of people they considered dangerous, and they were declared enemies of the state in secret at first, because they were still all members of the Nazi Party or other organizations affiliated with the Nazi movement. A few members of the SA learned rumors about this and acted out accordingly, and this was taken as evidence that it was indeed true that Röhm was trying to take over. Finally, on the 30th of June 1934, Hitler himself was party to the arrest of Röhm and all of his senior officers, which came as a surprise to all of them because there was no plan for a putsch. When Hitler entered Röhm's hotel room and declared him to be under arrest, Röhm was confused. He was just waking up, and the first thing he said reflexively was "Heil mein Führer," because that was what you were supposed to say when Hitler entered the room. He had not at that point realized that Hitler, his long-year friend, had turned against him. Röhm was taken to a prison and told that possibly he should commit suicide. When he didn't do that, he was executed on the 1st of July 1934. Almost all of the other people on that list were either arrested or killed, mostly targeting the present but marginal left-leaning wing of the NSDAP. The party then transformed into what is considered its final and ultimate form, and Hitler went on to achieve total power, and then they did all the fucked up shit that the Nazi Party did. The SA continued to exist, but it lost political importance very quickly. They didn't rise up against the Nazis, and many internal people were able to rise up the ranks if only they declared allegiance to the Nazi Party, because all of the senior people had been killed. Although they did sort of look back on Röhm with nostalgia and, denied his homosexuality. And Nazis of today still do this, when they look for an example of a good Nazi, they go, oh well, real National Socialism has never been tried. should have gone with Röhm. Because, you know, Nazis are just as fucking stupid as communists. Thank you very much for watching. This was just, I really sort of had the idea to make this video, so I just went ahead. I do want to make some more informative content, and in true Burger Creek fashion, I just picked the most explosive topic that I could find. In that spirit, I appreciate all of you. Have a fantastic day, and see you around, cunts.